It's the importance of this topic in the Indian context and specifically for Indian corporates and the MNCs that NDA typically represents cannot be underlined enough. India is among one of the highest ranking nations in terms of any of the corruption indexes that you can take. If I just quote one, which is the annual Kroll Global Fraud Report, um, India's got the highest proportion reporting not only corruption and bribery, but also procurement fraud. We ranked 78 out of 180 nations in the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. Important to note, when we look at foreign investments into the country, investors do get put out when corruption is high. So apart from it being a malaise in society, it has a direct impact, economic impact on the country, especially in times like these where investments into the country are going to become extremely important. So we are very pleased to have you today talk to us through the importance of how to navigate the Indian Prevention of Corruption Act, which has been amended recently, and you will help us talk through the amendments. Uh, just just as a reminder, while we have the Prevention of Corruption Act, the laws relating to corruption in India are not just limited to POCA. You've got also provisions in the IPC, but other than the machinery around POCA and IPC, you've also got the Comptroller and Auditor General and CVC, which play an important role due to public interest litigations in India. So, for instance, the courts have directed CAT should audit even public-private partnership contracts, where even if the PPP contract is, the government is not the controlling stake, because there is money going into these projects directly from the government, they can fall under their ambit. And based on that, you can have a significant oversight in terms of being considered a public official if you are working in these entities. Um, Such issues are something that we also need to think about, but I think hopefully we can take these further in more series that we can do on these issues. We also have an issue where lobbying is not recognized like it is done in certain European countries or US, where it's a major separate practice for lawyers, which again creates a lot of ambiguity in terms of being able to present your view, especially if you're coming in as a foreign investor to the government. And it's something, again, we need to learn to navigate in India, especially after, the famous Neera Radia controversy. So hopefully we can take all of these issues. If you have interest, let us know, and, we can take this up separately. Because as I hand over to you, let me just remind everybody, you've been a standing counsel for the police as well as the CBI. So you come with a very, very practical perspective. You're a third generation lawyer. I've personally worked with you I've had the pleasure of working with you on a few cases, and I've seen the practical insights that you bring and the kind of hand-holding you can do for clients. So we are very pleased to have you today. Talk to us through, if you want to just start off by talking us through the amendments that have been made to POCA and what does that practically mean for us?
Yes. Thank you, Pratibha, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity. And I also would like to thank Nishit Desai Associates for organizing such wonderful webinars. I think during this period of quarantine, when the courts are not functioning and we are basically locked on at home, this is the best thing to do, to interact with our colleagues, with our friends, with the students and the youngsters. And I'm really enjoying doing that. And coming on to the topic, Pratibha, which your office has framed, and the topic is corruption. Has the government tightened the bolts or still missed the bus? of course, if we have a comprehensive view of the anti-corruption laws, then I would say that government has enacted new laws in the last about 5 to 7 years, and has also amended the Prevention of Corruption Act. As you rightly said in your uh, address in the beginning, that corruption laws are not restricted only to the Prevention of Corruption Act. There are many laws which the government has framed, and few of them which I would like to nominate. I'm not going in detail in those statutes and in those laws, but I would like to make a mention as to comprehensively what all deal with the corruption. So we have Benami Transaction Prohibition Act, we have a Right to Information Act. Right to Information Act was enacted purely to make sure that there's a transparency in the government functioning. And we have Prevention of Money Laundering Act. We have a Whistleblower Protection Act, which came only in 2014. And then we have a Black Money Act, which came in 2015. And then in 2018, the Prevention of Corruption Act was amended. Now, let's confine today purely on the amendment under the POC Act. Now, corruption is rampant not only in India but all over the world, and many countries, of course, have worked hard to make sure that the corruption is curtailed, addressed, and also prosecuted. And Indian government, of course, has worked hard towards it. If we see the laws which we have in our country, it started in 1860 when we have Indian Penal Code. So Indian Penal Code 1860 had certain provisions which deal with the corruption cases, right from I think section 161 to 165A. All those sections dealt with the corruption matter, bribery and corruption. Now, from 1860 till about 1947, when we became independent, say for about 87 years, the IPC worked to punish the corrupt people. Now, at around 1947, the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act was also enacted. So, Delhi Special Police Establishment Act creates an organization which is now called CBI, which deals with the anti-corruption cases. So, a special act was enacted in 1947. And 1947 to till about 1988, twice 1947 Act was amended in 1952 and 64. And then in 1988, an act came which was comprehensive. The parliament, broadened the definition of the public servant, brought more and more people into the definition so that everybody who deals with public money, everybody who deals with the government, state or central government or a public enterprise was brought in the definition of public servant. And then from 1988 till about 2018, the act worked, prosecuted, cases were filed in the act, and prosecution was initiated and also concluded in many cases. But somewhere in 2018, the government amended and changed the entire complexion, the tone and tenor of the act. What is the reason is very, very important. So your topic says, has the government tightened the bolts or still missed the bus? I would say that the whole reason for amendment is to give clarity to the act. Because if you see the act from 1988 till about 2018, there were hundreds and thousands of prosecutions were initiated. And you will find somewhere around 2010. Now, 2010 was the Commonwealth Games scam, right? And then 2011 was a judgment which came from Delhi High Court, which actually created a havoc in this entire laws of Prevention of Corruption Act. That was dealing with the Department of Telecommunications scam. Now, if we see the definition of 13, section 13 in the old pre-amendment act, you will see it had an ambiguity. It had some kind of language which created the confusion. So therefore, in 2011, when the judgment of Ronu Ghosh was pronounced by the Delhi High Court and many accused persons were convicted, few of the people who were convicted in that case were the bureaucrats, were the public servants who had no dishonest intention while dealing with those contracts. But the Delhi High Court decided that even if they had no mala fide intention, even if they didn't have any dishonest intention, there's no mens rea, still the act was contrary to the public interest. That is the language used in section 13(1)(d) Roman 3. So that created a havoc that even if a government servant who may have, committed an error while taking a decision, but took a bona fide decision, can also be convicted for 3 to 4 years and can also be held that he has committed criminal misconduct. So the actual study and actual efforts started only in 2011. After that, if you all remember, I think in 2011 or 12 itself, the 2G scam came. Then the coal scam came. And in all these cases, you would find that the senior most officials of the government and sometimes the ministers were also charge sheeted and were being prosecuted. And in one case, in coal scam, even the former prime minister was summoned by the court, the special judge under the Prevention of Corruption Act. When all this started in 11, 12, 13, 14, then the government realized that these provisions are actually prone to misuse, politically as well as otherwise. Then the Law Commission was involved, and Law Commission applied its mind, and Law Commission gave a report saying that, sorry, this interpretation is absolutely wrong. How can a public servant who has not accepted any illegal gratification, there is no quid pro quo as far as he is concerned, and his act, which is bona fide, can give rise to a criminal prosecution. So from there, this entire thing started. And ultimately, in 2018, the Prevention of Corruption Act, Amendment Act 2018 came. And if we read now the provisions which have been amended, you will see it has given clarity. But at the same time, it has also brought some new teeth. There are some more. I'll just tell you in a nutshell to start with, and I'll go in detail. So if we see the amendment, in the beginning, this amendment, the first change which the amendment has brought is that it has given a time frame to the conclusion of the trial. So there is a clear-cut mandate in the act now that you have to conclude the trial in 2 years. You can ask for an extension for 6 months, but the ultimate aggregate period will not exceed 4 years. There's a clear-cut mandate. So the Prevention of Corruption Act cases which are pending for years together now will have to be concluded within, say, a very short period of time. So a good change which the government has brought in the amendment. Now, second change is the inclusion of the private parties. Now, earlier, the private parties used to be brought as an abettor or as a co-conspirator. Now, if a private party is trying to influence a public servant, then he can also be separately prosecuted in the POC Act. Primarily, earlier, the POC Act was only for public servants. Now it is for private people also. So that has been included. And second, they have brought in the provision of attachment of the case property, which they never had. Although there was an ordinance of 1944, which had a passing reference in the earlier act, but now there is a provision which has been brought specifically for that. And then they have brought in the single directive, which was actually declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in the case of Subramaniam Swamy. They have brought it into the act by saying, don't start any investigation or an inquiry before you take approval from the appropriate authority. Just like we had 6A in Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, they have it now. So therefore, in this case, they have specifically brought this provision. Fourth very important provision in order to protect the innocent people or innocent officials against the frivolous prosecutions is Section 19. In Section 19, they have brought changes that even the public servants who had resigned, who had already served and can also be prosecuted. So people, those who are no more in service anymore, they can also they can't be prosecuted because now they have to seek sanction even against them. Earlier, under Section 19 of Prevention of Corruption Act, this provision of sanction for prosecution was only limited to the officials who was serving, not who had retired. Another very important aspect which they have brought. So similarly, there are many provisions which have been overhauled, and the most significant is Section 13. Now, Section 13 is criminal misconduct, which again created a lot of problems earlier because of the frivolous prosecutions and also prosecutions against people those who had not done anything which is mala fide or any act which give rise to a criminal offense. So therefore, 13 has been amended now. Now, amendment of Section 13 had created some kind of a vacuum in the justice system because now the courts have to decide whether the pending investigation or inquiry cases or the trials or even in cases where people have been convicted under Section 13, whether that prosecution or that appeal can go on or not. This matter has not been decided till now. It is pending in the High Court as well as in Supreme Court, but it has to be decided. So this is very, very significant. Now, if we see the act, I hope everyone has the act. We can just see, the important aspect which I can highlight and people can note down. Number one, if you see the welcome change in the act is the definition of undue advantage. Now, undue advantage has been brought to bring in the bribes and illegal gratification, which can't be quantified in terms of pecuniary advantage. Means the benefit of admission of a child in a foreign college or a local college or any other benefit in kind has also been included as bribe now under the new act. So Section 2D definition is very, very important. And then Section 4, as I told you, is there is an amendment with regard to the outer limit of the trial. The trial has to be concluded now in 2 years, plus an extension of 6 months, 6 months, outer limit 4 years. Now, there is no major change in Section 7. Section 7 primarily remains the same. Section 7A and 8 have been brought to rope in the private parties, the private individuals. So you will see the heading itself says taking undue advantage to influence public servants by corrupt or illegal means or by exercise of personal influence. So this is against a private individual who's trying to influence the public servant, which is punishable for at least 3 years, 3 to 7 years. Same is with regard to 8. 8 is with regard to bribing of a public servant. So 8 is an individual who's trying to bribe. If he makes a complaint to the police that a bribe is being asked, there's a demand of bribe, then he will not be prosecuted. But in case he participates willingly, gives a bribe, he can be separately prosecuted. Earlier, he was also prosecuted with the aid of other sections. Now he can be directly prosecuted. Now, 9 and 10 are very important. I think, Pratibha, you also mentioned about the foreign companies who are coming from abroad and who have an apprehension in their mind that India is a place where there's so much of prosecution, there's so much of corruption. So the corruption laws should give some kind of a confidence in the mind of these foreign investors that they can't be harassed. In fact, I'm doing so many cases where, of course, I can't discuss those clients here, but there are foreign investors who come with a bona fide mind and who invest huge crores, thousands of crores in our country, and ultimately they have to face a problem like this. Fortunately, now post 2018, all those cases will I hope get some benefit, because those are cases where there is no exchange of money, there is no quid pro quo, but the action of the government servant is an action which is against the public interest. So therefore, I think after the amendment, those companies who are intending to invest or those who have already invested probably now will at least have some sigh of relief that they will not be harassed. Now, 9 and 10 have been brought in the amendment primarily to prosecute the companies. Now, they have brought commercial organizations. So commercial organizations can also be prosecuted. Specifically, of course, they can't be sentenced to imprisonment, but they can be fined. The companies can be fined. And 10 is a provision where people, those who are in charge of those commercial organizations and who have consented for the commission of the crime, they can also be separately prosecuted. So therefore, as I said, first objective, clarifying the law, bring clarity in the provision. Second is to also bring some additional teeth. So commercial organizations and the owners who were earlier prosecuted with the aid of 120B or 34 or an amendment under section 12 can now be separately prosecuted. Now we have to come on 13. Now you see 13, the definition of 13 has undergone a change, totally undergone a change. 13.1 Roman 13.1 A, B, C and Roman 1, 2, 3 were collectively read earlier. Now they have been reduced to only 13.1 A and 13.1 B. So what they have done is, instead of that complication with regard to public interest, they have reduced they have clarified the law, saying that before you prosecute a public servant, you have to establish that there's a quid pro quo, that he has accepted illegal gratification. And secondly, you have to assure that there's a criminal misappropriation of property. You know, all these public servants, we all know that governments are run by public servants all over the world. And unfortunately, these government servants are very meagerly paid. So they may have a salary of about 1 lakh or 2 lakhs of rupees, but they can sign a contract worth about 1,000 crores, maybe 10,000 crores. Just imagine, so you are giving them the authority, you are giving them that power. Go and sign a document worth about 10,000 crores. That poor chap may not have an air conditioner at home. So this is the disparity. So therefore, as I always say, that the judges, the bureaucrats, the cops, and the doctors who are working with the government departments, they all should be handsomely paid because they are sacrificing a lot. So in this case, why all this happened? This corruption actually happens more in the developing countries, where the developing countries have huge assets, huge resources, but they are given in the hand of poorly paid bureaucrats. So there, the person who is getting the benefit has an option to go and influence the public servant and try to grease his palm and take a contract. So today now, according to 13.1A, the offense is restricted only in those cases where the public servant accepts the money and criminally misappropriates the property. So therefore, there has to be a dishonest intention, there has to be a fraudulent intention, there has to be mens rea. So all this combined will make out an offense under section 13.1A. 13.1B deals with the case of disproportionate assets. Now, which is there earlier also, there is no major change. Any government servant, if he's found to have assets which are much more than his known sources, he can be prosecuted under section 13.1B now. There is no major change in that law. I will separately deal with the amendment as to what will be the impact of the amendment and what is the law. Let me just go through the provisions of the Prevention of Corruption Act for you at the moment. So 13 we have seen, there's a major change. Maximum changes under section 13. Now 14, there is a punishment for habitual offender, which is again a new. They have now included that if there is a person, there is an officer who is perpetually corrupt, who has multiple cases against him, so he will be dealt with separately. Of course, the sentence and the punishment will be more severe than the normal case. And then section 15. Section 15 is punishment for attempt. Now, in various cases, we have seen where the attempt to bribe has been made, although the transaction has not completely fructified. So those are the cases where there's an attempt, but not actual corruption which has taken place, because it could not take place, maybe because it was unearthed or unraveled, or there was a trap, whatever. For that, there is a separate offense which has been created now after the amendment, which of course is not very seriously punished. I think it is punishable for 2 to 5 years. So instead of 4 to 7 or 4 to 10, this is for 2 to 5 years. And then we have section 17. Section 17 is more or less like before, because these are corruption cases are a class in itself. So therefore, the Act says that only senior officials should deal with these kind of investigations. So as far as metropolitan cities are concerned, as CBI is concerned, for CBI, inspector is good enough. But for Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, we must have a ACP or a DYSP to deal with the matter of corruption. And then Section 17A, I told you in the beginning also, Section 17A has been brought in deliberately to protect the honest officials, which was not there earlier. Although there was a provision in Section 6A of Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, but that has been declared as unconstitutional because that was discriminatory. Section 6A protected officials who were joint secretary and above. So the constitutional validity of the same was challenged by Subramaniam Swamy, says that it is discriminatory. If you're trying to protect joint secretary and above, why don't you protect the other officials also? So Supreme Court said, yes, it is discriminatory. So therefore, they declared it unconstitutional. But by way of the amendment now, they have brought Section 17A. 17A says, before you start inquiry, if the act of a person in question, it is not trap, it is not bribery, the act of criminal misconduct. If the act of criminal misconduct is with regard to, with an act which is done through while discharging his official duty, then you have to take approval of the state or the central government or the public enterprise concerned. And then we have 18A. 18A, as I told you in the beginning also, has been brought to attach the property, the proceeds of crime, right? So there's a problem in this because now, because of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act cases, there is a predicate offense. In PC Act also, there are certain provisions which are included in the schedule of money laundering. Where money laundering, the ED comes and attaches. So there is now, we see very often in the court, there's a conflict between ED and the CBI. CBI will come and attach the same property. ED will come and attach the same properties. Now there's a conflict between both of them. Who will take the property? So therefore, this 18A has been brought to strengthen the investigating agency as far as Prevention of Corruption Act is concerned. They can go and seize. Now, Section 19 deals with the sanction for prosecution. As I told you earlier, it was only serving officials. Now, retired officials also have been included. So that's a change which is a welcome change, because I remember when I was standing counsel CBI 2008 to 11, I have seen many cases where CBI will apply for prosecution rejected. They will wait for the public servant to retire in case he's retiring in the next 1 or 2 years. And the moment he retires, the charge sheet is filed in the court, which I think is gross misuse of the provision of law and also the process of the court. But they do it very often. So to curtail that, to curb that, they have brought this amendment by saying that even if the public servant has retired, if his act does not give rise to a criminal offense and the prosecution sanction has been refused, he can't be prosecuted, which again is a very welcome change. I think that will help a lot of honest officials. And one important aspect which is included in Section 19 is that normally we see that Prevention of Corruption Act cases are investigated either by CBI or by the anti-corruption branch of a state, not by a local police. And if a complainant or an aggrieved party or a victim files a complaint and is not entertained, then an option is given to him to now file a separate complaint. So he can file a separate complaint in the court and saying that so-and-so officer is asking for bribe and he's a corrupt man, and can file a private complaint. Of course, earlier there was no provision because a court cannot take cognizance of a complaint without the prosecution sanction. Now an option has been given to him that he can apply for sanction and the government has to respond. If government doesn't respond, then there is a remedy available. This is a very important aspect. Now we will see a lot of cases which are being filed by the individuals. Of course, the court has to scrutinize and does not encourage fake and fictitious and frivolous cases, but that scrutiny has to be done by the court. Then Section 20 remains more or less the same. 20 is a presumption that if there are essential ingredients of the offense which are present, for example, Section 7, in case there is a demand of bribe, there is an acceptance of bribe. If these two things are, are proved, then it will be presumed that the accused has committed the offense. The accused has to now prove why he has accepted the money. And then we have many other provisions which are not all that important, but then saving clause. Section 1331. They're very, very important to interpret the amendment. Now, Section 30 and 31 deals with the sections of the Indian Penal Code which were there till 1947. Section 161 to 165A, they have been saved. So all those prosecutions which happened during that period have been saved. 1947 Act has been saved, but the amendments, the pre-amendment provisions of 1988 Act have not been saved deliberately. So there'll be a big, long drawn argument, litigation, which will happen for the next 6 months to 1 year, which is already happening, where the courts will decide whether the older prosecutions can go on or not. The courts will have to decide. But I can, for your benefit of your viewers and the people, those who are participating, I can give some important judgments, which I think nowadays become very important for students and even for young lawyers. So I can start by giving some judgments to you. One of the most important judgment in the Prevention of Corruption Act is, because it's a special act, and now that act says conclude the trial in 2 years. So therefore, the courts right from the beginning were not inclined to grant interim relief, because under Section 19(1)(c), there is a specific bar that don't grant any stay so that the trial go on, and don't entertain any revision against an order which is interlocutory. All these provisions were there right from the beginning, which ultimately were interpreted by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Asia Resurfacing Road Agency Private Limited versus CBI. This is 2018, volume 16, SCC, page 299. So this is the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. I had an occasion to argue this in the High Court when I was standing counsel, where I accepted that, yes, although the revision is barred, but the basic structure of Constitution is not barred. So Article 226, 227 are not barred. No act, no statute can bar the provision of the Constitution. 482 is not barred. So that's what the Honorable Supreme Court has said, that yes, you can challenge even the interlocutory orders or an intermediate orders like framing of charge and come to a higher court. But there's a direction that don't extend the interim stay for more than 6 months. Very, very significant judgment which everybody should know. And as I said, with regard to Section 7, that demand is a sine qua non. That to prove a trap, a demand has to be proved, that yes, the officer demanded money. In many cases where there was no demand, the case has been quashed and the accused have been acquitted. Two very important judgments. I'll just give you only two, but there are many of them. But B. Jayaraj versus State of Andhra Pradesh, 2014, 13 SCC, page 55. And then CM Girish Babu versus CBI. This is also on demand. That demand is a sine qua non. 2009, volume 3, SCC 779. And then with regard to Section 13, if you remember, what I had said is, to make out an offense of criminal misconduct under Section 13, the dishonest intention of the accused has to be established. If there is no dishonest intention, then the offense under Section 13 is not made out. Now, post-amendment, of course, Ronu Ghosh case will not be applicable, although it's pending in the Supreme Court, which says, dehorse, the absence of dishonest intention, you can be prosecuted. But there are two important judgments which says dishonest intention is an essential ingredient. C.K. Jafar Sharif versus State, 2013, volume 1, SCC 205, and M.N. Nambiar versus State of Kerala, AIR 1963, Supreme Court, page 1116. So these two judgments are very important when we are saying that there has to be a honest intention at the time of prosecution. Now, with regard to amendment, now this, of course, is not a settled law at the moment. We all are arguing. There are many top lawyers in the country who are involved in arguing this particular point of amendment, whether 13 prosecution under 31D can continue after the amendment. I'll just spend a couple of minutes on that. Amendment has a law. There's a law on repeal. There's a law on amendment. There's a law on substitution. There's a law on omission. Now, in this case, what the Parliament has done is, by way of this amendment, they have substituted the offence. So, earlier offence, the nature of the earlier offence was entirely different. The nature of new offence is entirely different. The essential ingredients are different. The tone and tenor is different. So, therefore, it is substituted. The new offence substitutes the old one. The old one is obliterated. Okay, it's abrogated. So, what is the law? So, you have to now see what is the law when the provisions are abrogated or they are obliterated and they are substituted. And the most important, they are not saved. I told you section 30 and 31, 47, all prosecutions are saved. 161 to 165, everything is saved. Why the Parliament has not saved 13, 1, ABC, D, and Roman 1 to 3, they have done it deliberately. That is manifested from the notes to the Parliament, that is manifested from their discussion, that is manifested from the Law Commission report, that they never wanted to save it because they are now giving a clarity to the offence. Earlier offence was creating a confusion. Earlier offence was giving rise to a false prosecution. Earlier offence was giving rise to a dissatisfaction in the mind of a public servant that he was unable to take a call. He will never take a call because he will always feel, he will have an apprehension that tomorrow when the government changes or my senior is changed, I will be prosecuted and necessarily it's better not to work. So to strengthen these public servants, the earlier offence which was there has not been saved. So what we all need to argue in the court when our turn comes, that the intention of the Parliament was not to save that offence. It is abrogated, obliterated, substituted, removed. Therefore, I can't be prosecuted in this case. I hope that a judge of a caliber of Justice Rohinton Nariman or maybe Justice Chandrachud should deal with a matter like this because it's a very, very important matter. Anybody, all judges are good. Anybody who understands how the Constitution works and how the law on substitution works should decide this issue because it has a very wide ramification. There are thousands of cases which are pending in the court. But if you want, I can give you a few important judgments on this just for your reading. You must read the law on retrospective application of an amendment. So these are some Constitution Bench judgment. Without elaborating, I'm just giving you the citation. I would like my young friends to read these provisions of law. So Kolhapur Cane Sugar Works Limited, very interesting judgment. Kolhapur, according to my compilation, is this is on absence of saving clause. That when the saving clause is not there, when Section 6 General Clauses Act is not considered deliberately, what is the law? So Kolhapur Cane Sugar Works is 2000, Volume 2, SEC, page 536. Then we have General Finance Company versus Assistant Commissioner of Income Tax, 2002, 7 SCC, page 1. And one last judgment is Rayala Corporation Private Limited. It's the old judgment. It's again a constitution bench, 5 judges, which deal with FERA violations. 1969, 2 SCC 412. So these are all on saving clauses. One must, read these important judgments. And then we have the retrospective application of the amendment. The laws are amended every day, right? Particularly the criminal law. I remember when I started off, we were doing TADA cases. So when TADA came in 1985, then TADA had the penal provision says if somebody dies in a terrorist activity, then the accused will be sentenced to death. There was no life sentence. It's only in 1987 the amendment came and they said, okay, either life or death sentence. Now the question arose that during those 2 years of period, 1985, 86, and 87, all those accused persons who were facing the trial, the offenses which were committed, what punishment do they deserve? It's a very interesting proposition. So 85, if a terrorist activity has been committed and he's being prosecuted and tried and he's being sentenced, whether he'll be sentenced with 85 or 87, the law says since this sentence has been reduced, so benefit should be given to the accused. It's a beneficial construction of that sentence which has to be done. On this, there is a very significant judgment. I think noted it somewhere. Yes. State versus Gyan Singh. 1999, 9 SCC, page 312. So, since the new act has superseded the old act, since life and death have been superseded, since death is superseded by life and death, therefore the benefit should be given to the accused. Similarly, there's a case of T. Barai versus Henry, 1983, 1 SCC 177. This is under prevention of food adulteration. There are many cases. I think you can do some research and see, there are plethora of judgments on this point. So one should read and then frame a question as to how we have to deal with the matter in the court. But in my personal view, after reading the amendment, the history of amendment, the debates of the amendment, the act, and also this law, my personal view is still it is decided in the court that the older section has been abrogated, it has been removed, substituted, not saved, and the provisions and the rigors are modified. It's very, very important. As I said in TADA, from death it became life and death. Out here, the erstwhile provision, the offense was a broader one. Now it has been reduced. So therefore, rigors are modified. Again, the benefit should be given to the accused. Now, these are few important aspects under Prevention of Corruption Act. Now, coming back on that topic. So my conclusion is that government has tried hard. Government has framed laws. The whole objective is that the corruption should be reduced because it instills confidence in the mind of the people. If there is no corruption, then of course we all feel happy. As Pratibha had mentioned in the beginning, there are various studies where they have seen where exactly India stands, and obviously India stands at the 79th or 80th position. There are 79 countries who are better than us. Of course, we have not achieved what we should have achieved, and there are various calculations of corruption in police, in bureaucracy, in. I think we all have to work hard and see that these laws actually function to its letter and spirit, and there are prosecutions. Problem is that there are many people who know that there is a corruption around, but they don't make the complaint because they feel that they will be harassed. They feel paying money is easier. So my personal view is the responsibility is not only on the government, on we also. We should not participate. Wherever there is corruption which happens, we must make a complaint. Now the act specifically protects the person who's being harassed and from whom the bribe is being asked. So now it all depends on the judges, how they take the new provisions of law, whether they are able to conclude the trial. Of course, if there is a swift justice, if the trial takes place in 2 years and the guilty is punished, of course, the confidence will be there among the people as well as in the investors who want to come and invest in our country. So we can take questions because we have spent almost 50 minutes. If you want to take questions, Pratibha, then you can take, please.
Thank you so much for that, because it was very enlightening. Specifically because, from a corporation perspective, there are two aspects to it. A strong anti-corruption act will help strengthen the business community and will ensure fairness, especially for the companies that follow the letter of law. And these are the MNCs who come in are already subject to very stringent laws like FCPA or UK Anti-Bribery Act. And if in India these are not enforced, then they have a disadvantage versus the companies that don't care about corruption issues. At the same time, there are enforcement issues in India.
Yes.
Firstly, even though prosecution starts, actual completion of cases and sentencing is a very, very lengthy process, if at all. Most of the CBI cases, ED cases, I don't know if I will see the resolution in my career, and hopefully I have a way to go. Secondly, we've seen lately in cases where either the existing directors get named, because you can't obviously prosecute the corporation. So you name all the directors, even though there are judgments against such a practice.
Right.
But the answer we get from the authorities is, well, you deal with it at the time of the charge sheet, but at the time of sending the notices, I am going to name them all, and even in the FIR, which for the kind of clients we deal with, even just naming those. So I've had cases where RBI regional directors have been named because they're sitting on the board of a company, whereas the offense might have happened 10 years ago, the alleged offense. And thirdly, the officials, like if you take the INX media case, the whole chain was named of the officials. Now, while the letter of law will protect in terms of intent and whether there was a criminal intent in terms of the acts, the decisions they made, but that causes a significant issue in governance, especially when we go for approvals for our investors. So overall, yes, I think the amendment, especially with all your outlines, does help clarify a lot of existing issues. Bring in safeguards for when you're being harassed. But at the same time, how do you ensure, and where do you see enforcement being the issue? Do you see the way CBI has been handling these cases being an issue? And what sort of a resolution as a practitioner can you think of that we can provide for our investors specifically?
Right. Your first question was with regard to delay in trial. You said that it takes years to punish a corrupt person. I agree with you. It was the norm earlier, but now with the amendment, and also at least we can say in Delhi, there are 28 special judges who are appointed under the Prevention of Corruption Act, and the trials which they are doing is virtually day-to-day trial. They have about 50, 60 trials. So every day they will fix a case. They will not give adjournment. They will call the witnesses. So all these 28 judges in various districts in Delhi are making sure that the trial is concluded at the earliest. Now take, for instance, the coal scam cases. We have one specific judge who deals only with the coal scam. We had one judge who dealt only with the 2G scam. Now these are all big cases. That is why probably they get the attention and they get the preference. With regard to other cases also, as I see, because I do so many Prevention of Corruption Act cases, there is there is a speed up in the trial. It has happened from the last about 3 to 4 years now, where High Court monitors. They ask for reports from these special judges. Please give us monthly report as to what all you have done. So when we go and argue in the court, and even if we ask for a short adjournment, the judges normally don't agree. So I see a change. So first, my answer to your first question is I see a bit change in the system, and the trials are getting expedited. So your investors and other people, your clients should at least get that confidence that gone are the days when the trial used to take a decade or maybe 15 years. Now the trials will be concluded in 1 or 2 years. Now, your second question is very important with regard to implication of all the directors. Now, we must understand the law that when we talk about offenses under the Indian Penal Code, when we talk about the offenses under IPC, Prevention of Corruption Act or money laundering, there is no vicarious liability of any director. So when the investigating agencies nominate everybody, say for instance an independent director who's a former governor of RBI or a chairman of a bank or
Right.
some tribunal, chairman of a tribunal who goes on the board, for offense under POC Act and offense under money laundering, they can't be implicated at all unless and until an overt act is attributed to them. Now, with the amendment, if we see section 9 and 10, the word used in section 10 is person in charge of commercial organization to be guilty of an offense. This is when the commercial organization is an accused. Earlier, commercial organization were brought with an aiding section. Now it says where an offense under section 9 is committed by a commercial organization and such offense is proved in the court to have been committed with the consent and connivance of any director, manager, secretary. So the language is very important. It is not tested as of now because it has just come. Just see the language. Such offense is proved in the court to have been committed by the consent and connivance of director. So simply because somebody is an independent director will not make him an accused under Prevention of Corruption Act. Similar is the provision in money laundering and in many other special acts where there is no vicarious liability. So we can always, whenever he or she is charge sheeted, normally they should not charge sheet. If they are charge sheeted, we can straight away go and challenge in the higher court, file a quashing petition. Even at an early stage, if the person says that he had already resigned, for instance, he was not even on the board when the call is taken, you can go and challenge in the High Court, file a petition saying that I was not even there when this act in question, which is being investigated by CBI, is concerned. So we have options available of challenging those implications at a very early age during investigation, or at a stage when charge sheet is filed, or at a stage when we argue on charge. But certainly, sometimes they do it just for harassment. So I see, again, I have so many instances which I can share with you where people are being called from America, Switzerland, Swiss company. The director is being called for unnecessary, questioning which is not required, questioning which they can do it on video conferencing, questioning which they can do even calling as an agent or a power of attorney of that person, but they do call. Maybe they want to show that they are powerful, they can call anyone from the world. But it's very unfair and it's a sheer harassment. Now, coming back onto the point, in IPC, in POC, in Prevention of Corruption Act, in any other act where there is no vicarious liability, no officer can be implicated. That can be challenged straight away. If he's not involved in the day-to-day, if he's not involved in that particular act which is under investigation, he can always challenge it in the court of law. But yes, there are some acts where vicarious liability is mentioned, just like, Prevention of Food Adulteration, Weights and Measurement Act, dishonor of check. If you are a director, you're responsible. You're managing director, you're responsible. Those are different laws, not Prevention of Corruption Act.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for clarifying those, Vikas. Payal, can I just bring you into the conversation? Can you just help us? We are already at 7, but just help us close. And I think there's some questions also for Mr. Pawar more.
Yeah. Thank you, Pratibha. I think we'll just first start with the questions itself. I think, so one of the questions, interestingly, has been, I think, considering you have worked as a standing counsel for the CBI, they are saying in most cases they end up seeing the FIRs under the provisions of the IPC itself. So why is it that the provisions of PCA are not being brought into the picture and cases are not being filed specifically under the PCA?
Under the PC, okay.
Yeah.
Very often we will see that the regular cases are registered by CBI under the provision of Indian Penal Code as well as under Prevention of Corruption Act, because that gives them the power to investigate. So these anti-corruption branch in CBI can investigate only offences which are under POC Act, right? So, and also if they want to investigate the role of the public servants. So very often they do it. In coal scam, for instance, they have always brought in section 13(1)(d). But after thorough investigation, they came to the conclusion that no, there is nobody from the Ministry of Coal who was involved in the case. So they filed a charge sheet under the Indian Penal Code. So when they add 13(1)(d), they add to investigate the role of the public servants. When they don't implicate them, means they have ruled out their involvement. They have conducted a thorough investigation. They could not find any material against those public servants. So therefore, they file charge sheet only in the IPC offences. And IPC offences normally are those offences which are tried by a magistrate, not by a special judge. PC Act, the trial has to be conducted by a special judge, which is a higher court. And in IPC, the CBI now will file a charge sheet in a court of a magistrate, so giving one more level of appeal to the accused persons.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I'll move back to the topic which Pratibha was dealing with, which is about the commercial organizations in India facing a lot of criticism because you often see the directors getting implicated. But
Yes.
one of the defenses which has come up in the new amendments is that as long as the commercial organization can show that there are adequate procedures in place, it's going to be considered as a valid defense. And it was said that there are going to be separate rules and guidelines which will come into place. Obviously, that's not yet come. It's been 2 years. So one of the questions is what procedures would be considered adequate for the purposes of a defense?
You know, when we draft the procedures for any commercial organization, we must read the section 9 and 10 very, very carefully, because we are talking about the offenses which are committed by the companies, by the organization. And now we are talking about people, those who run the organization. Now, when we deal with the corruption cases or with the bribery cases, we deal with the fact that somebody in the organization is trying to influence the public servant to get some benefit. Like there is a contract which has to be given by a public servant, and the commercial organization and one of the officers of the organization, he goes and tries to bribe the public servant and takes the contract. Now we are talking about rules saying that there may be some people in the organization who are not aware of what is happening. Maybe one junior official, out of exuberance, just to impress his senior officer, goes and bribes a public servant and comes back and tells his senior, look, I have got a contract for you. Now the question is whether the senior officials and other officials who are not even privy to this kind of transaction, not even aware of what is happening, can they be prosecuted? So therefore, the language in section 10 is, and such offense is proved in the court to have been committed with the consent and connivance. So two words which you have to identify here is consent and connivance. Consent is that senior officers told the junior, please go and bribe. He has given a clear-cut consent. Second is connivance, where they have planned, senior officials given the money to the junior is gone and given it to a public servant. So therefore, to prosecute the officer of a company, they have to show that there is a consent and connivance. The rules which have to be framed are rules where there are checks and balances, which shows that every action, every movement of file has to be monitored by a senior official, and all approvals have to be given by at least 2 to 3 people, just like they do it in the government offices where there are multiple layers. So frame the rules, taking into consideration that there are checks and balances, where one act of a officer of a organization is checked by a senior and then again by a senior. So therefore, the chances of conniving with the public servant is reduced. So read 9 and 10 and then frame the laws and the regulations.
I guess in that case, for companies, it would be useful if they have some code of conduct, manuals, and training being conducted for the employees itself, for them to be aware as to what the process which needs to be followed internally. And there is clarity on those aspects. I'm guessing that might help from a due diligence as well as monitoring and review perspective over here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're right.
I'll take up just one more last question before we conclude today. It's specific about a reporting obligation relating to offences under the POCA. I believe one of the defences is that if somebody who is given a bribe informs the officials within a period of 7 days, that might be considered as a valid defence, considering that to show that there has been some kind of pressure exercised and he or she was compelled to do so. But is there any specific obligation on the individuals to go and report such offences?
Yeah, if you read section 8 actually will clarify this. What is important is that since it's a very ticklish issue, and since now the corporate organizations are also involved, it is important that the employees are trained under the act. They should be aware of. Sometimes officer is not even aware of the act which he is doing, whether it's crime or not. But what section 8 says is offense relating to bribing of a public servant, that is, from a private individual perspective, any person who gives or promises to give an undue advantage to another person or persons with intention to induce a public servant to perform improperly a public duty or to reward such public servant for the improper performance of public duty shall be punishable. So they have made it punishable. Now the proviso is very interesting. Provided that the provision of this section shall not apply where a person is compelled to give such undue advantage. Now I think this is not properly worded. How will you say compelled? So this becomes a defense. That means you have paid, you will be prosecuted. Now during the trial, you prove that you were compelled. Second proviso is interesting. Provided further that the person so compelled shall report the matter to the law enforcement agency or investigating agency within a period of 7 days from the date of giving such undue advantage. Now, out here, first is compelled, but he has not informed. So it becomes his defense. Second is you inform immediately. So you have paid the bribe. Nobody has reported to the investigating agency. There is no crime which is registered, but within 7 days he goes and informs that I was compelled to pay this. Then probably he may not be an accused because on his complaint, the FIR will be registered. Then he will become a complainant. In proviso 1 situation, he may not be a complainant because somebody can report. But in proviso 2, he can be a complainant and he's protected. And third, provided also that when the offense under this section has been committed by commercial organization, such commercial shall be punishable with fine. So there are 2 provisos. First is your defense when the case is filed. Second is when no case is registered on your complaint, the case has been registered. So it's a matter of education. How you educate your employees and inform them that these are the provisions, which will help you even if you have committed the crime.
Thank you so much, sir.
We can take few more questions in case you find.
Yes, I was just going to go to the next question itself, and I will going to request the host to just allow us to give us 5 more minutes so that we could go through the questions. Yes. So it's a very interesting one. It says that, especially corruption cases in our country, we see that they remain undecided and inconclusive for years. So is there any specific reason for that? We do not have enough judges who would deal with it. And that's specifically the reason why we have time-bound trials introduced under the amendments itself.
Yes. Of course, earlier, the cases used to take a lot of time. And of course, less number of judges is one. Pendency is second, that there are so many cases which are pending, lakhs of cases which are pending. And so therefore we need dedicated courts, we need fast track courts. So therefore all these 28 judges which I was talking about are the courts which are in Delhi, where they are dedicated only for Prevention of Corruption Act cases. According to Supreme Court has intervened and directed they will not do anything else. And you'll be surprised very often when we go to these courts and we find that the judge is sitting in the chamber doing nothing, so we ask the court master and sometimes even the judge that why only 2 cases listed. He says we can't hear any other case because the Supreme Court says you hear only POC case, and there were 2 cases. Cases have been adjourned. So situations have changed. But of course, we used to use, we must now start using the digital technology to our advantage, which is available. I quote my experience in Greece, I quote my experience in Dubai, where I've seen 20 witnesses. The statements are recorded, they are examined in 1 or 2 days. Everything is digitally recorded, just like you and I are talking, and this entire webinar is being digitally recorded. If we want to prepare transcript of this, or if you want to prepare what exactly we have spoken, we can do it later, but at least we have concluded everything in 1 hour. So if you start asking me question and then you start getting it typed in a computer or a typewriter, just imagine how much time this 1 hour session will take. This is what happened in Greece when we went there. The witness is called, he's asked questions, it is digitally recorded, he's sent back, transcript is prepared in the next 2-3 days and circulated. So transcript work is given by a back office. But in India, we record statements, we ask questions, question is typed, then witness answers, his answer is typed, then there are mistakes in the typings are corrected, then my question is not properly typed, then the answer is not properly typed. There are so much of confusion. Although now in at least metropolitan cities we have high-tech computers, but we must use digital technology. We should have more number of judges, and of course we should have dedicated trial court lawyers who should do only trials. Now we do everything. We are in the trial court, we're in the high court. So more and more people should pick up trial work, and they should specialize in trial work. We see that we can expedite the disposal of trials. So, but yes, there is a delay. It happens, and I would say we all contribute to the delay.
Thank you, sir. I think, sir, you've covered another, your answer itself has covered another question, which was what should be done to actually curb this? Because for so long, we have seen that we have been unable to punish the corrupt practices, and judiciary was not doing enough towards it. I think your last answer itself about use of digital technology itself answers what should be done to actually curb it.
Yes.
Before we end, I have one question for you actually. We dealt with one of the aspects where we spoke about prior approval being required, whether it is for serving public officials or for retired public officials from the relevant union or the state government. My question is, they have been given a timeline also within which the investing authorities need to do it, 3 months, which is extendable by a month.
That's right.
Will this act as a deterrent in some way? Because now you need to go ahead and ask for the approval. It's only in cases that if you're caught red-handed, you don't need that approval, which is obviously going to be a rare occasion. But if you need to go back and keep asking for the approvals from the relevant union and state government, instead of actually aiding the process, will it act as a deterrence in some way and not aid in actually convicting those relevant public officials?
Deterrent means you're saying the public servants will take advantage of this.
My question is, will it actually dilute the power of the authorities itself for effectively prosecuting them?
I think we have to do a delicate balance between both. Now just imagine the situation where there is actually an honest man who is doing his work properly, but he has people around him who are corrupt, right? Suppose a file has to go to a 7 level. Level 3 is an honest man, and he is not agreeing on certain thing. Then rest of the people can try to implicate him also. So therefore, I feel that it's important to protect the honest people because they are the people who run the country. So I, in fact, welcome this change. And I can also tell you from my experience, if we talk about sanction from prosecution, 9 out of 10 cases, sanction is given. In fact, 95% sanction is given. And if you talk about these approvals, most of the time approvals are given. It's very difficult to say that we are not giving the approval because that is capable of being challenged in the High Court. refusal of sanction can be challenged in the higher court. There is a judicial review. So it's not necessary that if approval is not given, then that's the end of the story. Or if the sanction for prosecution not given is the end of the story. There are remedies available in law. But for honest official, there has to be protection, because we need to protect these honest people who are working. They are the one who are running the show in the country. We have more of corrupt people, less of honest people. We have to protect the honest. So anything to do to protect an honest officer, I always welcome it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot. I think the session has been extremely insightful and informative, at least for people who do, all of us who work in this profession, and we are dealing continuously with our clients and commercial organizations and their directors facing these issues. It's extremely useful and very helpful for all of us. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation and joining us on the panel today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.